Virgin rancher took shelter with two Apache sisters. His life was never the same. The sun beat down on the barren plains of the Arizona Territory, 1,878. A relentless furnace that promised no quarter, only a slow, agonizing surrender to the heat. Elias Croft pulled his wide-brimmed hat lower, the sweat stinging his eyes as he surveyed the unforgiving landscape. At 28, he had traded his cavalry uniform for the dust of a secluded ranch, a small, desolate parcel of land that fought him at every turn, much like the memories of his past. The silence here was a constant companion, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on him, echoing the emptiness within. He had sought this solitude, this isolation, believing that by severing all ties, he could outrun the ghosts that haunted him. He had inherited this land from a distant uncle, a man he barely knew, and in a way, he had inherited more than just acres of dust and scrub brush. He had inherited a profound and debilitating sense of detachment. His father, a man forged in the crucible of war, had taught him that a soldier's heart was a liability. His mother, a fragile soul who had faded away soon after his return from the campaign, had reinforced that lesson in her own gentle, sorrowful way. "Keep your heart locked up tight, Elias," she'd whispered on her deathbed, her voice a fragile wisp of a memory on the wind. This world ain't kind to those who feel too much. The world he had known had been a place of brutal efficiency, where a man was judged not by the kindness he showed, but by the strength of his will. He had lived by those lessons, locking away his heart in a vault of stoic indifference, a fortress built to withstand the ravages of war and loss. In the 2 years since he had returned from the war, he had barely spoken a word to anyone beyond what business required. The few ranchers who passed by his property thought him strange, a young man who didn't drink at the saloon, didn't attend the town socials, a man who seemed to exist in a perpetual state of absence. They whispered about him, calling him the shadow behind his back, but Elias didn't mind. He preferred the silence of the desert to the empty chatter of men who couldn't understand the darkness he carried. Loneliness was a small price to pay for peace, a necessary penance for the sins he believed he had committed. The morning had been clear, a vast, azure canvas stretching to the horizon, but now, a low, ominous wall of reddish-brown clouds rolled in from the west, moving with unnatural speed. Elias frowned, recognizing the signs. These weren't ordinary storm clouds. They carried the weight of a sandstorm, a tempest of blinding dust and wind that could bury a man alive. He'd seen it before, the way the air grew still and heavy, the way the animals sought shelter, their instincts screaming a warning that he had learned to heed only through hard-won experience. He spurred his horse, a stoic gelding named Ghost, toward the small adobe shack that was his home. It was barely a mile away, and he knew he had to outrun the fury of the approaching storm. But as he rode, the wind picked up with a vengeance, and the dust hit him like a physical blow, a dense, choking cloud that turned the world into a churning vortex of red and brown. Within minutes, he couldn't see Ghost's ears in front of him. The world became a white wall of fury, a hellish landscape of blinding dust and howling wind. He'd miscalculated badly. This wasn't just an early storm. This was a killer sandstorm, the kind that left a man disoriented and lost 50 feet from his own front door. Elias knew he had to find shelter, any shelter. His ranch house was at least 2 miles back, a ghost in the swirling chaos. Impossible in this weather. Ghost stumbled, nearly throwing him, and he realized with growing dread that he'd lost all sense of direction. In the blinding dust, every direction looked the same. He gave Ghost her head, trusting her instincts more than his own. The gelding pushed forward, head low, fighting through drifts of sand that seemed to appear from nowhere. Elias's hands went numb inside his gloves. The fine dust coated his eyelashes, making it hard to keep his eyes open. Just when he thought they were done for, Ghost stopped so suddenly he nearly flew over her neck. Through the swirling dust, he caught a glimpse of something. A flicker of orange light. Fire. His frozen mind took a moment to process it. Fire meant people. People meant shelter. He slid off Ghost, keeping one hand on her reins, and stumbled toward the light. It came from a small structure tucked against a rocky outcrop, barely visible, even 20 feet away. A Navajo hogan, he realized with surprise. The round, domed shape was unmistakable, though he had never seen one this far from the reservation. Elias hesitated. Navajo. His commanding officer's voice echoed in his memory. Can't trust 'em, son. They smile to your face and put a knife in your back. But the sandstorm was a knife already, cutting through his coat, his skin, into his very bones. Pride and prejudice were luxuries he couldn't afford. He approached the entrance, a flap of hide that glowed from the fire within. His frozen fingers fumbled as he knocked on the wooden pole beside it. A courtesy his mother had taught him. Always announce yourself, she'd said. Manners matter, even at the edge of the world. Hello? His voice came out as a croak. I'm sorry to bother. I'm caught in the storm. The flap pulled aside, and Elias found himself looking into dark eyes that held both weariness and surprise. A young woman stood there, perhaps 25 years old, with long black hair braided down her back. Behind her, another woman, slightly younger, rose from beside the fire. Both wore traditional dress, soft deerskin decorated with beadwork that caught the firelight. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Elias knew what they saw. A white man, armed, at their door. He could see their tension, the way the older one's hand moved to something at her belt, a knife, probably. He couldn't blame them. The treaties meant nothing out here. White men had given them plenty of reasons for distrust. Please, he said, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely speak. My horse, we're lost. I mean no harm. The younger woman looked back at her companion, her sister, Elias guessed, seeing the resemblance. They exchanged words in their own language, quick and low. Then the older one nodded slightly. Come, the younger woman said in accented English. Bring horse. Elias nearly wept with relief. He tugged Ghost forward, and the women showed him where to tie her on the lee side of the hogan, somewhat protected from the worst of the wind. His fingers were too numb to work the knots, and without a word, the older sister took over, her hands quick and efficient. Inside the hogan, the warmth hit him like a physical blow. A small fire burned in the center, smoke rising through the opening at the peak. Wool blankets and buffalo robes created a cozy circle around the flames. The space smelled of smoke, leather, and something else, herbs, maybe, or tea, brewing in a pot near the coals. Elias stood awkwardly near the entrance, dripping melting sand. Unsure of the protocol, the younger woman gestured to a spot near the fire. Sit, you free standing there. He collapsed more than sat, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. The older sister studied him with intelligent eyes, then said something to her sister, who nodded and began preparing something in a small clay pot. I'm Elias Croft, he managed. I have a ranch about 3 miles south, or at least I think it's south. Hard to tell in the storm. I am Laya, the younger woman said, surprising him with a name that sounded soft and melodic. This my sister, Ayana. Laya, Ayana. Not the names he'd expected. He must have shown his surprise because Laya smiled slightly. Mission school, she explained. They give us new names. Say our real names too hard for white tongue. There was no bitterness in her voice, just matter-of-fact acceptance. Ayana handed him a cup of something hot. The ceramic burned his frozen fingers, but he held on, letting the heat seep into his bones. The first sip made him cough. It was strong, bitter, with an aftertaste of juniper and something earthy. Medicine tea, Laya said. Warm you inside. As feeling returned to his extremities, pain came with it. His fingers and toes burned as if held to hot coals. He must have shown it on his face, because Ayana spoke for the first time. Pain is good. Means no frostbite. Drink more. They moved around him with quiet efficiency, hanging his wet coat near the fire, offering him a blanket for his shoulders. Their kindness confused him. Everything he'd been taught said Navajo were savage, cruel, not to be trusted. But here were 2 young women sharing their shelter, their medicine, their warmth, with a stranger who represented everything that had been taken from their people. Why? He asked suddenly. Why help me? He gestured vaguely at himself, unable to finish. Laya and Ayana exchanged glances again. Then Laya sat across from him, her face serious in the firelight. "Storm does not care if you're white or Navajo. Cold kills all same. We know what it means to need shelter." The wind rattled the Hogan walls, but inside, the fire crackled peacefully. Elias found himself relaxing for the first time in he couldn't remember how long. The tea was working its magic, warmth spreading from his belly outward. "You live here?" he asked, then immediately felt foolish. Obviously, they lived here. "For now," Ayanna said. "We move with seasons. Summer came early this year. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming." The storm raged on outside, but inside the Hogan, an unexpected peace descended. Elias, for the first time in years, found himself talking, truly talking. He told them about his ranch, about the isolation that had become his chosen prison, about the ghosts of his past that had followed him from the battlefield. He didn't mention the names of the men he had seen die, the faces of the children caught in the crossfire, the cries that still echoed in his nightmares. Instead, he spoke of the endless work, the struggle to make something from nothing in a land that seemed determined to break him. They listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed they understood more about the harsh realities of the frontier than he had expected. "You have no woman?" Laya asked eventually. "No children?" Elias felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "No, I keep to myself." Ayanna tilted her head, studying him with those penetrating dark eyes. "Young man with land, with horse. White women must want you for husband. I don't. That is, I haven't." He stopped, frustrated by his inability to explain. How could he tell them that he'd never even held a woman's hand, that the thought of courtship, of opening his heart to another person, terrified him more than any sandstorm? He had been trained to kill, not to love. He was a weapon, honed for one purpose, and he couldn't see how to be anything else. But somehow they seemed to understand without words. Ayanna poured more tea, and Laya added another log to the fire. They didn't press, didn't tease, just accepted his awkwardness with a grace he didn't deserve. As the night deepened and the storm showed no signs of abating, Elias realized something had shifted inside him. For the first time since leaving the army, he didn't feel alone. These two women, who by all accounts and laws should have been his enemies, had shown him more genuine warmth and acceptance than he'd experienced since his mother's death. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for the shelter, the tea, for—" He gestured helplessly, unable to articulate what he meant. Laya smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to beautiful. "A lonely soldier took shelter with two Navajo sisters," she said, her eyes twinkling with a shared secret. "This night will change him forever." Elias choked on his tea. "I'm not." "How did you?" Ayanna laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "We have eyes. We see man who does not know women. Is nothing shameful." But Elias felt the shame anyway, burning hotter than the fire. Here he was, supposed to be the superior one, the civilized one, yet these women saw through him completely, saw his inexperience, his fear, his loneliness, and still offered him shelter. The wind howled louder, and the Hogan walls shuddered. But inside, wrapped in warmth and unexpected acceptance, Elias Croft began to feel something he'd thought lost forever. The possibility of connection, of understanding, of a life beyond mere survival. As the fire burned low and his eyelids grew heavy, he thought he heard his mother's voice on the wind. But this time, instead of warning him to lock his heart away, she seemed to whisper, "Sometimes, Elias, the greatest courage is in learning to trust." The first thing Elias noticed when he woke was the silence. The howling wind that had driven him to shelter had died to a whisper. Gray morning light filtered through the smoke hole above, casting the interior of the Hogan in soft shadows. The fire had burned low, just embers glowing beneath white ash. He lay still for a moment, disoriented. The events of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike. The sandstorm, the desperate search for shelter, the unexpected warmth of the two Navajo women who had taken him in. But the smell of smoke and leather, the soft breathing from across the fire pit, told him it was all real. Laya sat near the entrance, working on a piece of pottery, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Ayana was nowhere to be seen. When Laya noticed he was awake, she set aside her work. "Storm passed," she said simply. "Your horse is well." Elias sat up, his body stiff from sleeping on the ground, though the wool blankets had been more comfortable than he'd expected. "I should go," he said, though something in him resisted the idea. "Check on my ranch." Leah nodded, but made no move to hurry him. Instead, she reached for a pot near the fire. "Eat first. Long ride and Sunday." She handed him a wooden bowl filled with something that looked like porridge, but smelled of sage and wild onions. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The first spoonful was surprisingly good, hearty and warming, with chunks of what might have been dried venison. "This is good," he said, meaning it. "Thank you." A small smile touched her lips. "White men usually don't like our food." "White men are fools," he said without thinking, then flushed at his own words. Laya's smile widened. "Sometimes yes, sometimes no. You not fool. I think just—" She searched for the word. "Lonely." The accuracy of her observation made him uncomfortable. He focused on eating. But she wasn't done. "Why you live alone? Your parents gone? Fever took them 2 years ago." "No brothers, sisters." He shook his head. "Just me. It's hard, being alone. We know this." Her voice carried a weight of experience beyond her years. "Ayana and me, we have only each other now. Father killed in army sweep. Mother died of sickness after brothers taken to reservation." Elias knew about the army sweeps. He'd been a part of them. The guilt was a familiar, heavy weight. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Ayana entered then, carrying an armload of firewood, sand, dusting her hair. She spoke to Laya in Navajo, her tone questioning. Laya responded, and Ayana's eyebrows rose. She studied Elias with those penetrating dark eyes, then said something that made Laya laugh. "What?" Elias asked, suspicious. "She says you look less like frozen rabbit this morning," Laya translated. "More like nervous deer." Despite himself, Elias smiled. It felt strange on his face, like using muscles that had atrophied. "Nervous deer is probably accurate." Ayana sat down the wood and came to sit by the fire. "You have woman waiting?" she asked bluntly. "Wonder where you are?" "No," Elias said, then felt compelled to add, "No one wonders where I am most days." The sisters exchanged one of their meaningful looks. Then Leah rose gracefully. "Come, we show you something." Curious, Elias followed them outside. The world had transformed overnight. The sand lay thick and pristine, turning the harsh landscape into something almost magical. The sun was breaking through clouds, making everything sparkle. But what caught his attention was their shelter itself. He'd been too desperate last night to really look, but now he saw how cleverly it was positioned, protected by the rock outcrop, angled to deflect wind, near a small spring that gurgled beneath a thin sheet of sand-covered ice. This wasn't a temporary camp. They'd been here a while. "You built this?" he asked, impressed. "Navajo women build homes," Ayana said with quiet pride. "Men hunt, fight. Women make life possible." She showed him their food cache, carefully hidden and protected from animals. Laya pointed out the herbs growing in sheltered spots, explaining their uses. This one for fever, that one for wounds, another to keep meat from spoiling. Elias found himself fascinated. His mother had known some plant medicine, but nothing like this. "How do you remember it all?" he asked. "Mother teach daughter, grandmother teach mother," Laya explained. "Goes back forever. White man's schools try to make us forget, but—" She tapped her temple. Some things too deep to forget. They were circling back to the Hogan when Ayana suddenly stopped, her body tense. She said something sharp in Navajo, and Laya's hand went to the knife at her belt. Elias followed their gaze and saw riders in the distance. 3 men moving slowly through the sand. "Get inside," Ayana ordered. "Now." But Elias recognized the lead rider's jacket. "Wait, that's my uncle, Edward. They must be looking for survivors from the storm." The women relaxed marginally, but didn't lower their guard. Elias understood their caution. 3 white men finding 2 Navajo women alone could go bad quickly. "I'll talk to them," he said. "Tell them I sheltered here. They won't cause trouble if I'm here." Ayanna looked skeptical, but Laya nodded. "We trust you." Those 3 words hit him unexpectedly hard. When was the last time anyone had trusted him with anything important? The riders approached slowly, horses struggling through the deep sand. "Elias," Edward called out when they were within earshot. "By God, boy, we thought you were buried for sure." "Nearly was," Elias replied, moving to meet them before they got too close to the hogan. "Found shelter just in time." A younger man, Elias's cousin, had fixed his eyes on the hogan, and more specifically on Laya and Ayanna, standing near its entrance. Well, what have we here?" "The ladies were kind enough to share their shelter," Elias said firmly. "I owe them my life." The cousin spat tobacco juice into the sand. "Navajo squaws looks like. Ain't supposed to be off the reservation. Storm didn't care about reservations," Elias said, keeping his voice level. "Neither did their kindness." Edward was studying the situation with shrewd eyes. He was a stern man, mostly, but Elias could see him weighing options. 2 Navajo women alone, no men in sight. The reservation boundaries were a good 50 miles away. "You know, I have to report this," Edward said finally. "It's the law." "You know what happens to women sent to the reservation alone?" Elias countered. "Is that Christian?" The cousin laughed, an ugly sound. "Since when do you care about squaws, Elias? Hell, since when do you care about any woman? We all figured you preferred the company of your horses." The insult was meant to provoke, and it worked. Elias felt rage rise in his chest, hot and unfamiliar. But before he could respond, Laya stepped forward. "We saved his life," she said clearly. "Fed him, kept him warm. This, how white men repay kindness." "Nobody asked your opinion, girl," the cousin growled. "I'm asking it," Elias said, surprising everyone, including himself. "And I'm telling you all to move along. Nothing to report here." The atmosphere shifted, became dangerous. Elias had never challenged his family before, certainly not 3 armed men. His hand moved instinctively toward his gun, then stopped. Violence wouldn't help here. Edward studied him for a long moment. "This ain't like you, Elias. These women got some hold on you. They showed me decency," Elias said simply. "I aim to return it by doing what's right." Ayanna had moved up beside her sister. Both women were ready for whatever came next. Elias saw his cousin's hand drift toward his rifle and tensed. Then Edward sighed. "Hell, I didn't see nothing out here but sand and more sand. You boys see anything?" The cousin looked ready to argue, but his father's look silenced him. The third man, a hired hand, just glared. "Thought not," Edward continued. "Come on, boys. Let's check the southern pastures." He turned his horse, then looked back at Elias. "You be careful, son, this kind of thing. It can go bad for everyone involved." After they left, Elias found himself shaking. Not from cold or fear, but from something else. He'd stood up to them. He'd chosen a side, and it wasn't the one he'd been raised to choose. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. "Why?" Ayanna asked. "Why you risk for us?" Elias looked at the 2 women who had taken in a stranger, who lived with daily danger just for the crime of being free. "Because it was right," he said. "Because you trusted me." Laya smiled, that transformative expression that made his heart do strange things. "Come, tea is ready." Back inside the hogan, the atmosphere was different. The caution was still there, but underneath it, something warmer. Ayanna actually smiled at him as she poured the tea. Laya sat closer than before, close enough that he could smell the sage smoke in her hair. "You should go soon," Ayanna said, but her tone was gentler now. "Check your place before more men come looking." Elias knew she was right, but leaving felt wrong. In less than a day, these women had shown him more genuine human connection than he'd experienced in years. The thought of returning to his empty ranch, his silent meals, his cold bed, filled him with dread. "Could I?" He stopped, gathered courage. Could I come back? Bring supplies? Maybe payment for your kindness? The sisters consulted silently. Then Leah nodded. You know where to find us. But, Elias. She paused, choosing words carefully. This is dangerous for you. For us. You understand? He understood. A white man visiting Navajo women, bringing them supplies, protecting them from the law. It would destroy his reputation at best. At worst, it could get them all killed. I understand, he said. But I want to help, if you'll let me. Ayanna reached out suddenly and touched his hand. Her fingers were calloused but gentle. Lonely dear, she said softly. Maybe not so lonely now. As Elias prepared to leave, checking on Ghost and gathering his still damp coat, he felt something fundamental shifting inside him. The walls he'd built around his heart, brick by brick over 2 lonely years, were beginning to crack. Leah walked him to where Ghost waited. That night changed him forever, she said, echoing her words from the night before. But now there was something else in her voice, something that made his pulse quicken. It's not night anymore, he pointed out. She smiled. No, now is morning. New beginning, maybe. As he mounted Ghost and turned toward home, Elias looked back once. The 2 women stood together, dark figures against the light-colored sand, watching him go. He raised his hand in farewell, and they waved back. The ride home was hot, but his heart was warm. For the first time in years, Elias Croft had something to look forward to, something more than mere survival. He thought of his uncle's warning, of the dangers ahead. But stronger than fear was this new feeling, a connection to something beyond himself. 2 Navajo women had offered him shelter from more than just the storm. They'd offered him a chance at a different life. As his ranch came into view, Elias made a decision. He would go back, he would bring supplies, and maybe, if they'd let him, he would learn what it meant to not be alone. The lonely deer had found something worth the risk. Elias stared at the coffee growing cold in his hands, seated at the rough wooden table he'd built himself. 3 days had passed since the storm, since the night that had cracked something open inside him. The ranch house felt emptier than ever, its silence oppressive rather than peaceful. He'd lost 3 head of cattle to the sandstorm, found them buried in the north pasture like statues. It was a blow he could ill afford, but strangely, the loss barely registered. His mind kept drifting back to the hogan, to dark eyes reflecting firelight, to gentle hands offering tea, and unexpected understanding. "What's wrong with you?" he muttered to himself, pushing back from the table. But he knew what was wrong, or perhaps what was finally right. That afternoon, he loaded his pack horse with supplies: flour, salt, coffee, a haunch of venison from a deer he'd shot yesterday. He added wool blankets, unsure if they needed them, but wanting to contribute something. At the last moment, he included a small packet of sugar, a luxury even for himself. He remembered Leah's tea, and wondered if she'd ever tasted sweetened coffee. The ride to their camp felt both eternal and too brief. His heart hammered as the rock outcrop came into view, half afraid he'd find them gone, moved on like smoke in the wind. But the hogan stood where he'd left it, and relief flooded through him so strongly it made him dizzy. Leah emerged as he approached, as if she'd been watching for him. She wore the same deerskin dress, but had added a colorful woven shawl against the cold evening air. Her face showed surprise, then something that might have been pleasure. "Elias," she said simply. "You came back." "I said I would." He dismounted, suddenly awkward. "I brought supplies to repay your kindness." Ayanna appeared from behind the hogan carrying a freshly cleaned rabbit. She looked at the loaded pack horse, then at Elias, her expression unreadable. "You risk much coming here. You risked more taking me in." The 2 women helped him unload the supplies, exclaiming softly over the sugar, running their hands over the wool blankets. It was clear they'd been making do with very little, too proud to beg, too stubborn to surrender to the reservation. "Stay," Leah said as he prepared to leave. "Eat with us. Tell us about your ranch." He knew he should go. Every moment here increased the danger for all of them, but the thought of returning to his empty house was unbearable. "If you're sure." Over the next weeks, Elias fell into a pattern that would have shocked his former self. 3 times a week, sometimes 4, he would find reasons to ride to the hogan. He brought supplies, yes, but also stories, questions, an eager ear for their own tales. He learned their real names, although they asked him to continue using their Christian names for safety. Some names are better kept hidden, Laya told him one afternoon as she showed him how to set snares for rabbits. Safer. He learned that Ayana had been married once, to a warrior killed in the army's last sweep through the territory. She wore her grief like armor, sharp-edged and protective. Laya had been promised to a man she'd never met, but the massacre had ended that future along with so many others. So we choose our own path, Ayana said firmly. No man decides for us now. Elias found himself telling them things he'd never spoken aloud, about his father's harsh lessons in manhood, his mother's gentle attempts to soften those edges, about the fear that had gripped him after their deaths, the way he'd retreated into himself like a wounded animal. My father said women make men weak, he confessed one evening as they sat around the fire. Said they distract from what needs doing. Laya laughed, not unkindly. Your father never met Navajo women. We make men stronger, if they're smart enough to see it. I think, Elias said slowly. He was afraid of feeling too much, of losing control. Ayana nodded. Fear makes men say foolish things, do foolish things, too. As winter deepened, Elias found himself changing in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. The rigid control he'd maintained for so long was melting like spring snow. He caught himself humming while working, something he hadn't done since childhood. Food tasted better. The sunrise seemed more beautiful. Even the cold felt less bitter. One afternoon, he arrived to find Laya alone. Ayana had gone to check their trap lines, she explained. They sat by the fire, closer than usual, and Elias felt that new, familiar flutter in his chest. You're different now, Laya observed. Less like scared rabbit, more like nervous deer, he asked, remembering Ayana's words. Number. She reached out and touched his hand, sending sparks through his entire body, more like man finding his heart. Elias turned his hand over, catching her fingers gently. They sat that way for a long moment, the touch saying things words couldn't. He'd never held a woman's hand before. Never understood how such a simple connection could feel so profound. I've never. He started, then stopped, flushing. I know, Laya said softly. Is okay. Some men touch many women but never feel. You feel first, is better way. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted. Any of it. Being here, feeling this, it goes against everything I was taught. Good teaching helps us live. Bad teaching keeps us from living. She squeezed his hand. Which is this? Before he could answer, they heard Ayana returning. Laya withdrew her hand, naturally, without shame or haste. But something had shifted between them. A line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. That night, riding home under stars sharp as glass, Elias wrestled with revelations. He was falling in love. The lonely soldier, who'd never even courted a woman, was falling for a Navajo woman who, by all rights and laws and social conventions, should be his enemy. His uncle would be horrified. His cousins would be scandalized. It could cost him everything. His reputation, his ranch, maybe his life. And yet, for the first time since leaving the army, Elias felt truly alive. He thought about Laya's question. Good teaching or bad? The answer seemed obvious now. Any teaching that kept him from this feeling, from this connection, was teaching worth abandoning. But knowledge and action were different things. Back at his ranch, staring at his reflection in the small mirror by the wash basin, Elias saw a man caught between worlds. The beard needed trimming. His hair had grown shaggy. But it was his eyes that showed the most change, no longer flat and distant, but alive with possibility and fear. What are you doing? He asked his reflection. Where does this lead? The reflection had no answers. But Elias knew he would return tomorrow and the day after, and all the days following. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, he couldn't turn away from the warmth he'd found in that hogan. He thought of his mother's deathbed words about keeping his heart locked up tight. I'm sorry, Ma, he whispered to the empty room. But maybe you were wrong. Maybe the world's cruelty is exactly why we need to feel too much, not too little. Hey there. Friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you. The next morning, Elias woke with new purpose. At the general store in town, he bought coffee and tea, ammunition for hunting, and after long hesitation, a small hand mirror with a decorated wooden handle. It was frivolous, expensive, the kind of thing that would mark him as sweet on someone if anyone noticed. The store owner, old Silas, raised his eyebrows at the purchase. Got a sweetheart, Elias? About time, boy. Elias mumbled something non-committal and fled, but he couldn't stop the smile that spread across his face. A sweetheart. The word felt foreign and wonderful. When he presented the mirror to Leah that afternoon, her face lit up like sunrise. She turned it this way and that, catching the light, then looked at him with eyes bright with emotion. "No one ever gave me gift before," she said quietly. "Not like this. Not just because." "It's nothing," Elias said, embarrassed by her reaction. "Just thought you might like it." Ayanna, watching from across the fire, smiled knowingly. "Nervous deer becomes brave deer," she said. "Good." That night they taught him words in their language. Simple things like water and fire and friend. His tongue stumbled over the unfamiliar sounds, making them laugh. But when Leah corrected his pronunciation, leaning close, her breath warm on his cheek, he felt that same electric connection that was becoming his new constant. "Some words can't translate," she said. "Like this." She spoke a phrase in Navajo, musical and complex. "What does it mean?" She and Ayanna exchanged glances. "Is about feeling," Leah said finally. "When heart recognizes another heart. When souls say hello." Elias repeated the phrase, mangling it terribly. But Leah smiled and nodded. "Yes, like that." As he prepared to leave, Ayanna pulled him aside. Her usual stern expression was softer, almost maternal. "You are good man," she said quietly. "But this path, you know where it leads." "No," Elias admitted. "I just know I have to walk it." Ayanna studied him for a long moment. "Leah has gentle heart, already wounded once. If you hurt her—" "I won't," Elias said quickly. "I'd never, not on purpose. But your world, our world—" She gestured helplessly. "Oil and water. Maybe," Elias said. "Or maybe just two people trying to find their way." Ayanna sighed. "Young hearts don't listen to wisdom anyway. Just be careful, both of you." Riding home, Elias reflected on Ayanna's warning. She was right, of course. This path led nowhere good by any conventional measure, but conventional had gotten him 2 years of empty existence. Maybe it was time to try impossible instead. The lonely ex-soldier was learning that innocence wasn't just about physical experience. It was about emotional walls, about the safety of isolation, about the careful constructions that kept the world at arm's length. And once those walls started falling, there was no stopping the avalanche. That night changed him forever, Leah had said. She was right, but it wasn't the single night. It was all the nights and days that followed, each one stripping away another layer of fear, revealing the man underneath who was capable of so much more than mere survival. The February sun had no warmth, but Elias barely felt the cold as he worked to repair the Hogan's entrance flap. His hands, once clumsy with anything delicate, now moved with practiced ease as he threaded sinew through leather. Leah watched from nearby, ostensibly working on her beadwork, but stealing glances at him with a soft expression that made his heart race. 3 months had passed since that first desperate night. The sand lay thick still, but paths had been worn between his ranch and their camp. Elias had learned to move through the desert like a shadow, varying his routes, always watching for other riders. He'd become part of their hidden world, and it had transformed him. "You're getting better," Ayanna observed, checking his work. "Soon you won't need us to teach you. I'll always need." Elias caught himself, flushing. But Leah looked up with that smile that undid him every time. "We know," she said simply. He'd brought venison again from a buck he'd taken down yesterday. As Ayanna prepared it for smoking, Elias found himself following Laya to the spring. It was their routine now, hauling water together, these moments of near privacy that felt stolen and precious. "I've been thinking," he said as they knelt by the water's edge, breaking the thin sheet of ice with a stone. "Dangerous habit for a man," Laya teased. "About spring, when the sand settles, you could stay on my land." He paused, gathering courage. "I mean, there's that old line shack on the eastern border. No one ever goes there. It would be safer then."